so can you hear me all right?
I can.
All right. Good evening. My name is Jack Macy. The date is the 21st of Thursday or Wednesday. The time is 5:28 p.m. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jim Macy.
All right. So just to give you a little statistics on the USA, total cases of COVID-19 today stands at 31,602,676. The total number of deaths are 565,613 for the USA. Per state capita, it's how many cases we have are 592,262, and the total number of deaths are 6,721. In Wisconsin, the fully vaccinated percentage of people are 29.7%, and for at least one or more doses, it's at 42.8%. For USA as a whole, the fully vaccinated percentage is 26%, or roughly 86.3 million people. I'll start with, have you got vaccinated?
I have been vaccinated. I had the Moderna shot and I've had both shots.
Perfect. What are the primary things you do on a day-to-day basis?
I work full time, and so I take care of things at home first before going to the office, and then spend a full day plus in the office working with different people and helping different customers and clients.
Okay. What's your job?
I'm an attorney. I represent companies in their employment matters.
All right. Where do you live, and what's it like to live there?
I live in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. We have a residence on Lake Winnebago, which is the biggest inland lake in the state. And Oshkosh is a community of a population of about 65,000 people. It's surrounded by other cities of similar size, so about 4 of them, so it bumps up to close to 250,000 within not too far of a distance. It recently was just ranked as one of the best places, small cities in the United States to live in, and also was voted one of the best places to retire in. So it's a really nice place to live.
You've been here your whole life?
No, I haven't been here my whole life. I came here in 1982.
All right. When you first learned about COVID, what were your thoughts about it?
Well, when I first heard about it, there was a lot of unknowns about it. There was a lot of fear amongst a lot of people about it because we didn't know just how big an impact it would have on individuals compared to other things that I've seen in my lifetime. You know, we didn't know whether it was going to be something like the flu, which wasn't as significant, or whether it would be something really devastating like either like AIDS, when AIDS originally came out, and if somebody got it, they were presumed that they would die, or polio, which was physically debilitating to people. So we just didn't know. We just knew it was a major, major thing. And there was a lot of unanswered questions.
Well, since you didn't know as much back then, and obviously you've gotten more information now from news media and just talking with people, what are your thoughts about it now?
Well, because I work with employment kind of stuff, I work on COVID related issues every day, both with people wanting to stay home or people needing to come back to work, or businesses trying to stay open or not stay open, or government requirements about staying open or not staying. So I see it every day. And I've also seen it develop over time, you know, since the beginning, since we've had this now for over a year. And my thoughts are, to some degree, quite a bit relieved, in a sense that while it is serious, it's not as deadly as some of the as some originally thought it might be, or as some past situations have been.
Yeah, you mentioned polio. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's one of them that, and I was really young, but I had a brother that had polio, and I knew other people, that got it, and then it was very physically debilitating, so yeah, that's one of them I'm referring to. Yes.
Right. And I would assume that probably concerned you growing up since I was in the family. We'll talk about concerns. What kind of concerns do you have about COVID-19?
To be honest, at this point, a year later, and with vaccines, I have significantly less concerns than I was originally concerned about. I think it's very manageable. I think people have come to deal with it. I think people are respectful in trying to avoid problems with it. We know that it can be really, really serious for some segments of our population, but in other segments of our population, the numbers are really good that if people get it, it's not going to kill them, and it may not be so bad.
Yeah, I understand. And obviously, it's been a year later since COVID has first initially hit, which is good to get some of that demographic and those numbers up now. And your thoughts as where, since we've been, coping with it for a year now, different thoughts, obviously. Um, with that being said, how has COVID-19 affected your job, from start to finish? Because obviously, as you mentioned, we're further down the line, and I'm sure it's less restricting now.
Well, personally, my job hasn't changed much because I still went into the office. I mean, we did all the safe practices and things like that. Other colleagues came into the office. Fortunately, nobody got sick amongst the group in the office. But again, people were careful. So personally, my physical ability to work and all that didn't really change. The work type changed quite a bit because there were lots of new laws, lots of new regulations for companies. So I had to study and keep track of all that with all the changes and things that were occurring, educate clients. I did lots of training, lots of programs, more than I probably ever have, to update people about what the new laws would be and the different leaves that would be available, and then all the different kind of cases that came up. So from a workload standpoint, I've been lucky. I've always had a good practice and been busy, but it's been an incredibly challenging year because there's lots of new information, lots of changes, and helping companies through that. It's been really good though. I've enjoyed the challenge, quite frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the type of employment you're in is perfect for my next question, in regards to, you're dealing with people on a daily basis and helping them out with their employment. So my question is, do you like, obviously, people who are affected by COVID-19 and their employment. So what people do you know and how did it affect them?
Well, lots of people. I worked on a case today where somebody was driving a van, for example, was their job, and the place that they worked at was dealing with challenged individuals, handicapped individuals at like a sheltered workshop. And he took his mask off, violated the safety rules once he got in the van, and for about an hour. So we had to evaluate that, and he lost his job. And he also didn't get unemployment compensation because that was a serious, serious health risk that really jeopardized the health of several of people in a really vulnerable population. In other words, if those people get it, they have serious, serious chances of serious harm and possibly death. So, that's just one example. That's just today. So there are other cases of people that were very afraid to come back to work, but the companies really needed it to come back. One was an administrative assistant in a company, for example, who everybody kind of had to coordinate with. And she was just scared. She just didn't want to come back to work. And I said, well, we got to have you. And then they considered that a resignation because she had to decide, do I want to just stay home? And they couldn't have her work at home or not. So there are cases like that. And then there's lots of cases of people that really did lots of neat things helping out other people, either in the medical profession, the firefighters, the police officers, the teachers. And I get to work with all of those kind of people and the great stories of the neat things that they did to help people and get through this scenario. So again, there's a story every day. It's unbelievable. It's incredible.
Yeah, I bet you get to talk to a lot of different areas of fields of work, and it's interesting to get that perspective. With that being said, obviously you have your work life and your family life, and COVID clearly has impacted both. And just wondering where you stand on how that's affected or impacted your family life back home.
Well, it has and it hasn't. It's impacted, students tremendously, where they lose out on the college experience because of virtual learning and the other aspects of it. That's been challenging for them, but at the same time, can be a positive challenge to recover from that or do better. Other family member decided to take time off from school because the virtual learning environment wasn't for them. But then they took on other challenges and opportunities in the meantime. So they're taking some positive risks in jobs and business opportunities that, quite frankly, he wouldn't have taken but for COVID. So, on the one hand, we've been really fortunate. If people did get sick in our family, we're not aware of anybody in our family that tested positive, first of all. There's some thinking that early on, a couple of family members may have had it, but symptoms were really small, minor. And in hindsight, knowing more, they might have had it. We weren't testing early, as you know, the tests weren't even available. That's how far we've come. So from a family standpoint, we've been really fortunate and not impacted that much, quite frankly, other than the things that I've talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in talking about family, you got to learn, obviously maybe the communication skills have changed. Definitely new lingo, as far as during any pandemic. Obviously you're going to create new words, you're going to talk different. And obviously COVID-19 was a isolation type of a pandemic. Do you think you've been socially changed, or how has that affected you socially?
Well, again, it's interesting. Even the company I work with is statewide and has offices in different parts of the state. And the way that it's worked has been different. It's been very different in the Milwaukee metro area with my colleagues. Not as many of them go into the office. Or Madison, when I went to do some work in the Madison office, I couldn't just go in the building. I had to check in out on the street at the door, and somebody had to come down to let me in, and all kinds of different protocols. In the Fox Valley where I work, it's safe and people are respectful, but people are less concerned about getting back to the office and getting back to their routine. So it's really varied that way in terms of what I see or what we've experienced. Has it changed life significantly for me? No, not really, to be honest, because I went into the office early on. I was careful. If there's other interesting positives to it, things like, we used to work through the winter and I'd have a cold or two, and people at the office would have a cold or two or the flu. In looking at that, we were talking about the other day, there's practically been no colds. There's practically been no flu. And as people use all of the hygienic safety practices of washing their hands and social distancing and wearing masks, there's been a lot of positive impacts on the other stuff that we just sort of rolled with and didn't think much about. That was part of winter in Wisconsin. Uh, it's been pretty non-existent. So that's been a very strong positive. And the other aspect of that, it's interesting because we're teaching all of that to the kids in schools. They're learning better practices and hygiene and things like that that'll carry on through their whole life. So there's negatives, but there's incredible positives that I think that'll carry through for many years.
It's you mentioned you're talking about other people, which is I'm gonna segue over to my next question regarding the community. Um, have your neighbor has your neighborhood at all felt the impacts? How are they adjusting to life? Do you see them less? Do you see them more? Or just how's your community at work? Is the work environment different? Do they treat you different?
No, the work environment really isn't different. We had some people that preferred to work at home longer, and the firm has been really good at that. If people could effectively do it and wanted to do it, they still continue to let them do it. And that's where I say, like Milwaukee, Madison, a lot more still stay home, where Green Bay, Fox Valley, Waukesha, we have a lot of people that are in the office. So that hasn't impacted that much. From a neighborhood standpoint, again, it really varies in where I go in the state. Here in the Fox Valley, the stores are really busy, the restaurants are really busy, the hotels are pretty much back. I had someone staying at one of the local hotels who was a person, and they said the hotel was full when we when we started this. And again, because I work with hotels from a business standpoint, they're down to 15-30% capacity at best was a good time period. So a lot of that's back. Uh, and so I don't see as much change there as we've sort of recovered.
Yeah, and that's good to get that to maintain that social health and in order and intact and preserve it honestly through a pandemic where um, we're isolated from each other. Uh, speaking of health, have you or you personally know anyone that has had COVID?
Oh, sure. Sure. But I don't know anybody who has got it to the extent that they were hospitalized or died. I don't know anybody in that category. I've heard of people who know people or relatives. Uh, I again, people that have had it quarantined and were fine, or had minor symptoms or things like that, fortunately. So I've known people that have had a lot worse flu and other things than what they experienced when they got COVID. And that's not to say COVID isn't serious or a big deal. It is. It just impacts people so differently in different age groups and depending on what their background or other health conditions are.
Yeah, I personally have. I'm the same. I have not seen anyone um, get critically ill with it to the point where they have either passed away or gone to the hospital and not come back. Um, you mentioned that you work for you're a lawyer, a public lawyer, and you clearly have ties with, or have worked with the government officials before, or know something about it. So, do you have any thoughts on how local, state, or federal leaders are responding to the crisis differently?
Yeah, and actually, I am in a unique position about that because I represent, when I say companies, both private sector companies like manufacturers or hotels or restaurants, but I also represent a lot of governmental businesses like counties, cities, school districts. So I've been involved in their decisions to pass different safety regulations. We were involved in some of the early litigation over whether or not a governmental unit would have authority to stop business. I've certainly written articles on the Wisconsin Supreme Court cases regarding the differences of the governor's authority to pass certain restrictive things. In fact, overturned 3 times now by the Supreme Court. And also from the business side to say, we'll take on our own liability and our own risks. Let us stay open, don't shut us down. So I've kind of been in the middle of all of those debates as we've worked through this. And if I had an opinion on it, I understand government's concern and the need to help in a health crisis, but I think they overshot this one. And I think history and hindsight's going to say that they kind of overreacted early that caused a lot more damage than had to have been done. But hindsight's great. It's easy to say that a year later versus what we knew then.
Yeah. That's a very interesting viewpoint. Um, in regards to getting news about COVID and, cycling the information that you get through different sources of media, um, what would you say your biggest reference point was when it came to receiving news and getting updates as far as either vaccines or total counts or just any news?
Well, I think I kind of tuned out what's referred to as the mainstream media, uh, because I didn't find it to be as helpful or as accurate. What I found to be more helpful was things like the CDC, and the guidance that was put out by the different agencies. And again, I recognize they had a tough thing to do because nobody knew what we were dealing with, but at least they put out guidance. They didn't put out dictating what everything should be, but they put out good, solid guidance that changed as we learned more. And I thought they did a good job, and I thought that was really helpful. One of the more difficult things to really sort through was what people would refer to as follow the science. Well, the science wasn't black and white, never has been. It certainly wasn't through this scenario. And through one of our senator's offices here in Wisconsin, they put together some really good medical information from a variety of medical providers, doctors, nationally known, renowned doctors. And so I listened to a lot of that and followed a lot of that to say, what are the pros in the business saying, that had a different point of view, and was able to sort through some of that. So coupled with the guidance from the health professionals, plus studying and listening to lots of videos from the doctors as this developed, was most helpful for me, and far better than just statistics or other things. You had started this interview with the statistics. I don't doubt any of the numbers that you're talking about, but the problem with statistics is you always got to know what's the background of the statistics. When we say X people died of COVID, did they die just of COVID, or did they have late stage cancer, and then they happen to get COVID and then died of that? Now, I'm not saying that's not serious. I'm not saying that's not a COVID issue. All I'm saying is you always got to look behind the numbers to see what it's telling me. I'll give you another example. It didn't tell me much to say X tested positive for COVID. One, we weren't testing early. We didn't even know how to test. We didn't have the test. Then there were multiple tests that took a little while, and there were false positives and other aspects with it. And then we were pretty much just testing people when they thought they were sick. So of course you're going to get a higher percentage that would say that. So it's what's behind the numbers on that. The other thing it didn't tell me is, just because somebody had COVID, how serious was that? Was it less than having a cold? Then really, is that really a good, helpful statistic? What I found the most helpful, and where I'm going with this, is what were the hospital numbers? What were the acute unit numbers? That's the serious stuff. And that I watched pretty closely, and we did through different parts of the state, the different health agencies did, because that's where we knew that something would be more serious and have a bigger impact on everybody. If our hospitals got overrun, that was a fear in the beginning, we were in big trouble. And fortunately, our country, our health professionals, our governmental officials made some pretty quick, good decisions that don't get much credit now, but to avoid lots of big issues about that. That's what I watched, if that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. That's helpful. You've mentioned before that um, you have personally not had COVID. Is that correct?
Not that I know of. And I really didn't have, I've had a runny nose or some of that kind of stuff. I've tested 3 different times. One, I tested because I was going in for a minor medical procedure, just routine, and they test you before you can have anything done, and I was negative for that. I went in another time because I wasn't feeling good about a month ago and I was concerned about it. So I did one of the drive-through clinic tests and it was negative. And then more recently, I had another medical situation and they tested me again and it's always been negative.
Right. So where I was going with this was, if had you have said that you had COVID, my next question was, did you at any point thought either your life was in danger, or um, you thought that there was no help and you felt helpless at any point in time?
I never did. And while I took it seriously and while I took precautions and I followed the guidance, I was not afraid of it. And I certainly didn't stay home. I did grocery shopping, but I did it smartly. I followed the guidance. I followed the other things we're supposed to do. I did do social activities to the degree that that was smart and safe. I went to work regularly. And I never ever felt, gee, if I get COVID, I'm going to die. Um, I just, I didn't want that to run my life, quite frankly. But that's not to say it isn't serious. And that's not to say that we didn't make smart decisions along the way to do that. Okay. So it wasn't that I don't believe it. It wasn't that I was totally ignorant about it. Just, it wasn't going to rule my life either.
Right. And just to go off that, what do you think the biggest takeaway you've learned, and just moving forward, your thoughts on this whole COVID experience? And I understand it's still happening, but what do you think you've learned the most from this experience?
Well, I think, well, let me take it on a bigger scale first, more a global scale, is I think as a country, we've learned that we can't wait for this stuff to happen and that we collectively, regardless of politics or any other business, I think we can do better preparing for this stuff. And you can never be fully prepared, but I think we were unprepared. And our initial response was almost like a 1700s response because we didn't really know what else to do about that. But with a little bit more preparation, I think we learned that our medical people can adapt pretty quick. I think we learned that our pharmaceutical companies are unbelievable in this country. And some stuff we take for granted about how fast they turned around testing, first of all, and then turned around vaccines is unbelievable. It's unprecedented. So learned a lot of things to feel really good about. Can we prep better? Sure. Do we have a lot ventilators? You know, early on there was discussions about let's turn around industry to make sure in case we have hospital overruns with ventilators, we're ready to go. You know what? We're ready to go. You don't even hear that word anymore. It just happened. And while we argue and while we fight and while we talk about this country once in a while in a negative fashion, we step back and we look at this point in history and we look at whatever, all that happened at all levels. It's incredible that the impact wasn't significantly greater and how much we can do when we have to do it. I'm really encouraged by that.
Yeah. And you know, do you think that the COVID-19 experience is still going to be affected in a year?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, there's so much we keep learning. I'm really optimistic about the vaccines. I'm really, and we're not standing still either. I mean, there's developments and things being worked on all the time beyond the vaccines about this. And again, we don't get a lot of news on that, but there's certainly there is news about those kind of things going on, whether it's stem cell work and other things that are helping with this and the mutations of it. I'm encouraged by all of that. We'll be living with it to some degree, but I think things will, you know, after 9/11, the world changed and flying on an airplane was never quite the same. And it's kind of like what we'll go through here to some degree. It'll never quite be the same, but we'll get back to a sense of normalcy, and it'll just be a little bit different as to what's normal. But I think we'll be fine, and I don't think it'll be much of an impact in a year. That's my hope and goal and prayer.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we've been doing it for a year. I, you hear about stories about people either losing tremendous amount of weight, learning a new subject, learning something new, teaching something new. Do you think you've had any success stories or anything you learned anything new during this lockdown?
Well, I learned a lot new employment law as I had to because it changed a lot. But other than that, I learned to have a lot of faith and hope in lots of people. I learned to have lots of faith and hope in local governments that made some mistakes, but made a lot of good decisions too, working through this kind of stuff. I learned a lot watching the schools learn how to adapt to some of this. And quite frankly, we got a lot of work to do there. Of all the industries that I work, like I say, I work with lots of them. I think the schools, both from a college standpoint and a secondary school standpoint, had the toughest transitional periods during the last year. And I think they have a lot to learn. I don't think they did well. This is just my opinion. But I think of all the industries, they came in last, versus all the other industries that had the same kind of challenges and same kind of struggles in some form or another. But again, that's just my opinion. I think schools will do better down the road once they think this through. That's not all schools. A lot of schools did incredible. A lot of schools are still failing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna wrap it up here, Jim. So thank you very much for your time, and just want to make sure and double tap on you're okay and you agree to the consent of filming this and posting this to the archive.
Absolutely consent, no problem at all. And good questions, good discussion, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, of course, Jim. It's great to have you. You have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you. Bye now.